Hello writers, and welcome to another topic video. This one is a little bit different and I kind of have mixed feelings about it, but I thought it would be useful to share the experience of what I've learned in making the decision to unpublish my book, which had been available on Amazon since January of 2019. And there are some warnings to be found in this video that will hopefully help some of you to avoid the same mistakes that I now feel I've made. So let's get started. Okay, so this video is just a bit of an honest, real talk because a couple of weeks ago I made the decision to remove my only available self-published work from sale. I had used Amazon to publish it. It was a literary novella and I was really proud of it, and I still am in a way, but if I could go back and do things differently, then I wouldn't publish the book at all, and I think it would be a good idea to talk about why. I first launched my novella on Amazon in January 2019, and actually holding something in my own hands that I'd written was an absolutely amazing feeling. I don't think I'll ever forget it or get bored of that feeling if I'm lucky enough to ever have that happen again. At first, I was actually really elated by the fact that I had a book available, because it was a novella. I'd self-published it because there's only a very narrow place in the market for novellas in traditional publishing, especially if you're a new writer. And at that time I was working on my first new novel idea in years, which was in a totally different genre, so I thought self-publishing in a different format and genre would be completely fine. And it is completely fine to do that as well if you write across, multiple formats. But when I started working on my fantasy novel, I knew I wanted to go for traditional publishing with it, and this is where I started kind of learning a lot more about the industry and also about myself as a writer. Now, my literary novella was something that I'd written many years earlier in my early 20s, at a time when I was still quite full of the bias of academia that came from my creative writing degree. I'd been told time and time again that if I was going to be a writer, then I had to be tackling serious and important issues, and my novella certainly was doing that. But I still love the story and the novella, and I always will. But in writing my first fantasy novel since my early teens, it really helped me to shove away the last remnants of that bias and helped me to discover my true passion. I want to be a fantasy writer. I haven't had this much fun writing in a long time. All the ideas that I've had since rediscovering this passion have been either fantasy or magical realism, and I absolutely love it. I feel like my mind is free to imagine again without worrying about how serious a story is or whether or not I'm saying something important. I feel like I'm in my element now, but I didn't realise this until quite a while after I'd self-published that literary novella. So the self-published work has kind of become a bit of an odd one out, and that didn't start to bother me until about a year after publishing it, coupled with the fact that, I'd realised I'd learned a lot since then and I was a much better writer than when I launched the novella, and it kind of made me believe that I should have completely overhauled the book before publishing instead of just proofreading it. I didn't feel like it matched up to my standards anymore. Now, this is a very normal thing for writers because we're growing all the time. Every time we write a project, we improve a bit, and everybody needs a first book. We can't just continue rewriting old works when we improve, or we'll just never move on. So I convinced myself to just leave the book on sale. It wasn't badly written at all, but it did still kind of niggle at me a little bit. So I continued to grow and change as a writer, and eventually I realised that I had published the book for the wrong reasons in the first place. I published it a couple of months after kind of a dark period in my writing life where I'd been on the edge of accepting that I would never be a good writer. And this was probably about 2.5, 3 years ago, I think. But now my mindset couldn't be more different. But back then I'd worked really hard on this novella for years, only to discover that it had very little place in the traditional market. I'd failed at querying it because I was unaware of the novella classification until an agent very kindly told me about it. So it had failed in several Novella competitions and indie press submissions as well. Alongside these failures, I'd had just repeated failure, more failure, with many writing competitions I'd entered with other short stories and flash fictions, and was kind of feeling that all my hard work was very much for nothing. So the only answer for me at the time was that I was never good enough and never would be. I now know that rejections like those are just part of the craft, and it doesn't mean that the work is bad necessarily. You know, there are so many reasons why you might not place in a competition or be accepted by an agent or by a magazine, but I really couldn't see it back then, and I had done some research, but I hadn't done enough. So from there I looked into self-publishing, but I didn't think I'd be able to publish the novella at a high enough price to even make a small royalty on the paperback copy. The book was 178 pages and Amazon does take print costs. So you get 60% royalty on paperbacks after your print costs are taken. So if your book costs £5 but the print costs are £2, then you're earning 60% royalty of £3 per book. But then I found out that it would actually be reasonable to charge enough for the book to make a small royalty, and I self-published. But looking back, I feel this was really rushed, and the reason that I published was because I just needed some kind of writing victory of any kind, some kind of confidence boost. You know, I hadn't thought about branding, I hadn't thought about the repercussions of traditionally publishing other works. I didn't really market it much because the plan was to release other novellas and spend money marketing the newer ones on the hopes of creating passive sales for the first one. And when I realised all of this, I was kind of annoyed at myself, not gonna lie. But the decision to remove the book from sale wasn't easy by any means. It's taken me about 6 months to make this decision. And I did it in the end because I wanted a clean break. You know, I wanted to kind of relaunch one day, whether either traditionally or self-publishing, as a fantasy writer. But it turns out you don't get that kind of clean break when you unpublish a book. So, what have I learned from this experience? And this is the information that may be of use to you guys. Let's discuss it, and I hope that it will be of some help in the decisions that you make with what to do with your work. So, number one, firstly, never ever rush into self-publishing or any kind of publishing. You don't need to publish a book immediately just because it's finished and it's polished. There is no harm at all in letting a completed project sit proudly on your finished work shelf and hanging fire for a while. Because before you publish, there are a few things that it is really important to consider. Which brings me to number 2. Hi Shiva. What's up? Shiva says hi. Get your butt out the frame. So, number 2, and this advice came from an industry professional on the Writer's Block Discord server. Shout out to Brian, thanks so much for your time and all the resources you share with us. But before you publish anything, consider what kind of a writer you want to be known as and why. Consider your brand, because when you put a book out there, you are basically launching a brand. Really do your research into all the options available to you before you make a choice. And do that research in a way that helps you to make your own decisions rather than one that kind of listens to the biases of other people. And I say that because I've heard so many people taking heavily negative views on the traditional publishing industry and process without really doing proper research into why it functions the way it does, for instance. So make your own minds up, do your own research, and there is no rush to make this choice. Publishing is a slow-moving beast, and rushing is going to leave you with mistakes that it might be hard to erase. And that brings me to number 3, and I say that it may give you mistakes you can't erase because I removed my book in the hopes of getting a clean break, but that's not what you get. It turns out that Amazon do not remove the information product page for your book when you unpublish it. It doesn't disappear, so anyone searching for my name or book title will still see that page on Amazon. This is because they refuse to remove books that have been assigned an ISBN or ASIN number, and it's also because there's a chance that third parties may try and sell the book on a second hand. So that sales page on Amazon remains exactly where it is, and it just says that the book is unavailable. And the same is actually true for Goodreads. If you don't use Goodreads, it's kind of like an app that allows you to keep lists of books you've read, you want to read, and books that you liked. It allows you to rate and review them and that kind of thing. So the same is true for that app for Goodreads. I looked into getting my book page removed, but they refused to remove published books from their records. So that's important to keep in mind. Make sure that you're aware and that you're sure before you're self-published, because you can't erase the book's footprint afterwards. Number 4 is because I didn't really have many other ideas when I published my novella. I didn't have any novel ideas at the time, or I'd only just started working on one. I use my real name, but now that I can't remove those information pages from Amazon or Goodreads, I have likely lost the chance to use my real name on what has become my writing passion, which is fantasy works, if I become traditionally published. Now, I'm okay with the idea of a pen name. I had kind of planned to use one anyway, but this is just a heads up on that front. Yeah. Number 5. So what would I do differently? I would wait. I would just have a bit more patience. I would have done more research. I would have waited a little longer just to figure out what kind of writer I wanted to be. I published this book at the start of what became a huge change in me as a writer. Of course, I didn't know that that would be the case at the time, but that is what I've learned from this, and that is what I wanted to share. I will be doing a video on it at some point, but there seems to be such a rush with writers nowadays to become published, and I think that's because we have the most wide variety of platforms available to do so without needing to necessarily go through traditional channels if you don't want to. But you can only publish for the first time once under any name, so make sure that you take the time to know what you want, the path that you want, and when you know, then you can give that choice 100% effort, hopefully in a way that doesn't leave you with some of the same regrets that I have now. So I'm going to say it again. You don't have to publish something immediately just because it's finished. It doesn't make you less of a writer to wait and debut with a project later down the line. Whatever path you all choose, I do wish you all the best of luck, but please do your research, know your own minds, and then you can go for it without looking back and wondering if you did the right thing. So I have a lot of mixed feelings about the decision that I made. I am relieved in some ways, annoyed in others, particularly about the fact that I can't remove my own book's information pages from the websites I mentioned despite being the author. And I'm also kind of sad. But I'm trying not to class it as a huge failure because I know that's not what it is. So yeah, a bit of a mixed bag, but making this video has also kind of taken a little bit of the weight off my chest with it. I am still proud of my novella, and who knows, in the future I may still revisit it someday. Just remember that there is no rush at all. So keep up all the amazing work, and I will see you all on the next video. Bye guys!